This tutorial is going to focus on how energy flows through an ecosystem. Remember, energy is the ability to do something. It's very hard, remember, to say what energy does exactly, but energy is often described in terms of what it does. Energy is the ability for something to do work, for something to happen. So if something is happening, whether it's moving or burning, or light is being produced, or there's electricity, in other words there's something happening, then energy is involved. And you studied energy in the last unit. So how does this energy flow through an ecosystem? Well, generally it's described as roughly a one-way kind of flow. And the ultimate energy source, the first energy source for everything else on planet Earth, is in fact the energy that comes from the sun. The sun is producing nuclear energy. It effectively converts hydrogen atoms into helium, and in that process releases enormous amounts of heat and light. It's the equivalent of a nuclear bomb or a nuclear reactor running all the time. And because of its incredible size, it generates incredible amounts of heat and light. And it's that heat and light that is the energy source for all of life on Earth. Of course, it's particularly the light. So the light energy from the sun is used by the producers, that is, all the plants, all the photosynthetic living things. So the producers use the light energy from the sun, and of course they turn it into chemical energy in the form of glucose, which you learnt about earlier in the year. Some of that light energy, as it gets converted to glucose, gets lost as heat energy from the plants. Then of course the energy in the plants is passed on to the consumers, that is the animals and other creatures that can't make their own food, via the food chain. So producers are eaten by consumers. So the energy tied up in producers gets passed on to consumers. As the consumers use some of that energy, or make their own energy in the form of ATP, some of that energy is lost as heat as well from the consumers. Then of course when the producers and consumers die, then the decomposers, that is the bacteria and the fungi mostly, then consume the consumers and the producers. So the decomposers get their energy from the waste material, the dead material of the consumers and producers that have died. And they also tend to lose some of that energy as heat. And then the decomposers can return some of that energy back to the very chemicals, the very atoms that, or the molecules that are found in the general soil or the atmosphere, which can then be absorbed back again into the plants. So essentially you have, roughly a one-way flow of energy. And by one way I simply mean the energy that ends up in life on planet Earth does not flow back into the sun. So it is one way from the sun through to all the living things on planet Earth. Now I'm going to clear that drawing on the page and just open another diagram. So if you want to pause it for a moment and have a look at that, then this would be the time to do it. Okay, let's have a look at this second diagram. Now this is a similar kind of diagram, looks slightly different, but it's saying roughly the same kind of thing. Again, we're looking at energy flow, but in this case we're also looking at something called trophic levels. Trophic levels mean feeding levels. So in an entire ecosystem, what are the feeding levels of the various living things that are there? So again we can see in this diagram that energy starts with the sun, and the light energy from the sun will be used by the producers, around about 10,000 kilocalories. So this forms the bottom of the food chain. So all the photosynthetic living things like the trees, the grass, the other plants use the energy from the sun, the light energy from the sun. And so a lot of the energy in an ecosystem is tied up in the producers. And as you can see, in this instance, about 10,000 kilocalories of energy. As the consumers, the primary consumers here, as you can see, eat the producers, only about 1,000 kilocalories of the original 10,000 get into the primary consumers. Again, some of that energy is lost as heat. When the secondary consumers eat the primary consumers, only about 100 kilocalories get passed on. And again, there's some heat loss. And then as the tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, you end up with only about 10 kilocalories at the top of the food chain. So you can see a lot of energy is lost, particularly as heat, as you go through the various trophic levels or feeding levels. So a lot of energy is lost as heat to the environment. So at the top of the food chain, there's only a fraction of the energy tied up in the living things compared to the amount of energy tied up in all the producers at the bottom of the food chain. So by trophic levels, we're talking about this is one trophic level, this is another trophic level, this is a third trophic level, this is a fourth trophic level. And in just a moment, we'll have a look at what's meant by a food pyramid. But you can see this kind of food pyramid idea shown in this diagram, where at the bottom of the food pyramid you have most of your energy, and at the top of the food pyramid you have the least amount of energy. So there are fewer organisms that can be supported at the top of the food chain, and there are many more organisms that can be supported at the bottom of the food chain. And just briefly to finish this tutorial, here's another diagram or picture of a food pyramid, very similar to the one that you've just looked at. The numbers are slightly different, but you can see they're roughly the same. So again, if we just take a quick look at it, at the base of the food pyramid you have the majority of your organisms, all your primary producers, all the things that carry out photosynthesis. And here you can see around about 9,000 kilocalories per square metre per year is available for these consumers. I think it was about 10,000 in the previous one, so around about 10,000 kilocalories. When you get to the level of the first primary consumers, the herbivores, the things that eat the plants, you lose a lot of that energy as heat, and so only 900 to 1,000 kilocalories are available. When the secondary consumers eat the primary consumers, again a lot of energy is lost, and so only 90 to 100 kilocalories is available. And then when you get to the tertiary or top level consumers, you can see only 9 to 10 kilocalories are available per square metre per year. So this is what we refer to as a food pyramid in an ecosystem. To finish this tutorial, let's just focus on the idea of biomass. Just remember that the word bio comes from the Latin word bios, which means life or living. Alright, so anything to do with bio or bios is to do with living things. So the study of biology is the study of life. So biomass is the mass, that's the amount of, if you want to think of it as weight, the total weight of all the living things in a particular ecosystem at a particular time. So we could talk about the total mass of all the plants and all the animals and all the microorganisms that lived in a particular forest at a particular time as being the biomass of that forest ecosystem. Or we could talk about the biomass of the whole planet. That is, every living thing on planet Earth could make up the biomass of planet Earth. So you need to just talk about where you're talking about, that is a particular ecosystem or a particular habitat, and the total weight of all the living things in that system. And of course, if you took all of that mass, so the total biomass of a particular ecosystem will be equivalent to a certain amount of energy, because energy is tied up in the very mass or stuff of the living things. So in many cases we have taken particularly dead materials, or we've chopped down trees, we've taken plants and used them as fuels because we can extract the energy out of that biomass to use for our own purposes, such as heating and so on. So much of the, particularly the recently living biomass, the plants and animals that have recently died, can be harnessed as biofuels So we can take that biomass, we can often burn it, and we can extract the energy out of it and use it for human uses to make electricity. We can use it for heating, etc. So this is what's meant by biomass.